Time now for our Friday Making a Difference report and the story of a man whose capacity for forgiveness is astonishing. He suffered the worst loss a parent can ever face, and yet he decided to turn his grief into something positive for himself and a troubled young man. Here's NBC's John Larson.
A documentary began the story like this.
14-year-old Tony Hicks shot and killed 20-year-old Azim Khamisa.
A 14-year-old murders a promising young college student for the cost of a pizza and becomes the youngest child in California history charged as an adult with murder and gets life in prison.
It was like a nuclear bomb going off in my heart.
Azim Khamisa, the father of the victim, buried his only son Tariq according to their Muslim custom. He climbed down into the muddy grave. It had been raining, and they lowered his son's body wrapped in a white cloth down into his open arms.
Yeah, I didn't want to live there alone. I stayed there a long time. When something bad happens, you can stop that bad from happening to other people.
But when he finally came up, he did something remarkable.
It is wrong to lie, to cheat.
First, he forgave the family of the killer.
It was a defining moment in my life. Only through that forgiveness,
which in turn helped Azim start the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, speaking together to more than 1 million children about the real pain of violence.
And sometimes it scars the soul forever.
Then, Azim visited Tony Hicks, the killer, who had never had a father, and forgave him too.
His forgiveness wasn't something I expected.
Now Azim is lobbying to have Tony released from prison early, like he was his own son. And when he gets out of prison, what do you hope for him?
We'll have a job for him at the foundation.
So you're going to hire him?
Absolutely.
This is the killer of your son?
Yes.
Tony says now he knows what a real father is.
I had a man forgive me for taking the life of his son.
And he will work for that father, and for many who maybe never had fathers, someday, whether he gets out early or not. John Larson, NBC News, San Diego, California.
So with that, please, with all the love in your heart, please welcome to the stage, Azim.
Good afternoon, greetings, and namaste. You know, I have been an avid writer. I journal regularly. I've authored 5 books, and Sage has, with their generosity, donated one of my latest books for you to take home. I thought I might start with a quote I put in my journal soon after this tragedy. By the way, this is a San Diego story. How many of you know this story? Because I know we've had a lot of, quite a few of you. There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. But a broken heart is an open heart. If one can learn to live with an open heart, gentle transformations manifest. This is a 27-year-old journey, and part of my goal this afternoon is to open your hearts. I didn't do the work of the foundation when my son was alive. I worked as an international investment banker, and often in the business world, I'm sure most of you can relate, you get hardened and you close your hearts. And what I have realized in my 27-year journey, which has been very fulfilling, it started very dark with murder. My first book was Murder to Forgiveness. And then I put a sequel to it, From Forgiveness to Fulfillment, because the work that I have done, especially with our young folks, has been very meaningful and very fulfilling, because investment banking was about money. This work is about saving lives of children. And my trilogy is From Fulfillment to Peace. And the young man who killed my son, you met him on the video, actually wrote the foreword to it. So here you have it, a very dark genesis, like losing my one and only son. I have a beautiful daughter and 3 beautiful grandchildren. I know you're dying to see their photo. I have it right here. It always brings a smile on my face when I think about them. But he was my only son. He was a good kid. He was a student, sophomore student at San Diego State University, an art student. He was a very gifted writer, a brilliant photographer, an old soul in a young body, and someday aspired to work for National Geographic. He loved travel. He loved cultures. And was his favorite hero was Gandhi, a man of peace. And he worked as a pizza delivery man on weekends to make some extra money while he was going to college. And he was lured to a bogus address by a youth gang in North Park, not far from university and not far also from where he lived. They gave the right apartment building address but the wrong apartment number, and he knocked on many doors trying to find out who'd ordered the pizzas. Of course, nobody had, so he came back to his car, put the pizzas in the trunk of his car, and as he was about to leave the site of the crime, he was already in the driver's seat, was accosted by 4 youth gang members. 3 of them were 14-year-old, and the leader of the gang was an 18-year-old who handed a 9mm handgun to a 14-year-old, and as my son is trying to back his car from the driveway of the apartment building, the leader gave the order, "Bust him bones." And he fired 1 round, which came through the driver's side window, entered my son's body right here under the left shoulder blade. The bullet actually traveled across the upper part of his chest, and it exited from his right armpit. It was fatal, and as the coroner explained to me afterward, he said the bullet followed a perfect path. A perfect path, I queried. I thought that was an interesting choice of words. But he was very quick to tell me, "Mr. Khamisa, I'm not trying to be insensitive. We do not see a path like this very often. What it means in my lingo is it destroyed all the vital organs in your son's body. And Tariq died drowning in his own blood a couple of minutes later over a lousy pizza at the age of 20. The sudden, senseless death of an innocent, unarmed human being. The overwhelming grief of a family. The total confusion as you try to absorb a new, hideous reality. And even though this happened 27 years ago, those early days are etched deeply on my heart, on my mind, and my soul. Needless to say, it broke my heart wide open. But sometimes in tragedy, there is a spark of clarity. Every saint has suffered the dark night of the soul. Needless to say, this was that dark night of the soul. And what I saw in this tragedy is that there were victims at both ends of the gun. Now, that didn't come from my intellect or my loving heart. I don't think us mortals are capable of it. Rather, it was a download from a higher power. I practice as a Sufi Muslim. Sufis are the metaphysical arm of Islam, much like the Kabbalah is the metaphysical arm of Judaism, and maybe the Quakers are part of the metaphysical part of the Christian faith. I used to meditate an hour a day when Tariq was alive. Now my practice is 2 hours. So that download came pretty immediately because when I learned that Tariq had been shot and killed, I remember I was in my kitchen. I lost strength in both of my legs as I collapsed to the floor, hit my head against the refrigerator and curled into a ball. I don't have the words of how excruciatingly painful that experience was. I've never felt pain like that in my life. Sure, most of you can relate that are parents or have kids in your life that are like your children. And the pain was so excruciating, I actually left at an out-of-body experience. I couldn't be in my body. And I've read that when victims experience deep trauma, they often do leave their body. And I believe I went into the loving arms of God. I believe in God. I don't remember how long I was gone. But when the explosion subsided, God sent me back into my body with the wisdom that there are victims at both ends of the gun. Now, it's easy to see that my son was a victim of the 14-year-old. I think it takes an open heart, empathy, and compassion to see that the 14-year-old was also a victim of society, a victim of American society. And that begs the question, well, who is American society? It's you and me. I was born in Kenya, I was educated in England. I actually moved to the United States to escape the violence of Idi Amin in neighboring Uganda. Tariq was actually born here. So I'm a naturalized first-generation American citizen. I do love my country. I'm sure we all do. And I know my knee-jerk reaction was I made a big mistake to come to the United States. I should have maybe moved to England or another English-speaking country. And my knee-jerk reaction was to maybe leave. But I'd lived here for 20 years. And I recognized that my love for my country was stronger than my rage. And it didn't matter where I lived. It didn't matter where I went. It's not something you can sweep under the rug. I still had to deal with the loss of my only son. I had to figure out a new life without him. Not an easy task. I didn't realize there were such things as youth gangs. I often came back from London, changed suitcases, and flew to Tokyo. And I was pretty shocked to hear about the violence and how many lives this violence takes of our children. Newtown, Connecticut, Sandy Hook, 20 first graders, 6- and 7-year-old were gunned down in automatic fire. In the richest nation in the world? How did we get here? Where children kill children? How many school shootings have we experienced? We lose a youth every couple of hours. The Economist, I'm sure some of you have read The Economist, did a study, and they took 25 first world countries, England, Germany, France, Australia, Japan, and added all the kids that die in those 25 countries, and took the total and multiplied that by 11. That is how many we lose in the United States of America. Now, we are a great country. It's amazing what we've done in a short 247 years. We are a meritocratic, democratic, although that's another conversation, is being challenged right now. Free market. There's a lot of opportunity. If you're willing to work hard in America, you can do well. But when it comes to violence, we are a very poor role model. And that's not a good thing because of our strength in being the only superpower. We have a tremendous impact on the global culture. What happens in America eventually happens in the world. And while we are exporting our free market, democratic, meritocratic, economic model, we are also exporting our violence. And we can spend hundreds of billions of dollars on wars on foreign soil. Yet every single day, right here in our backyard, our children are being killed in a frenzy of bizarre violence. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think it probably makes a lot of sense to you either. And having learned these horrific statistics, and to honor my son, 9 months after Tariq died, I decided to do something about it. And I founded the Azim Khamisa Foundation. And our initial mandate then was to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence. And we essentially had 3 goals. First was to save lives of children. Important to do. Our second mandate was to empower the right choices so they don't fall through the crack and choose lives of gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. And our third mandate was to teach the principles of nonviolence, of accountability, of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness, of peacemaking and peace building. We're not going to wake up one day and find out that the world is at peace. We have to proactively work at it. Every one of us, young and old. And I started with a very simple premise, that violence is a learned behavior. If you accept that as an axiom or as a truism, then nonviolence can also be a learned behavior. But you have to teach it. Kids are not going to learn this through osmosis. And where do our kids learn nonviolence? It might shock you, it did me, that by the time our kids are in grade 1, 6 or 7 years old, they've seen over 100,000 images of violence. Movies, TV, video games. Gratuitous violence. When I show up with the grandfather, as you also met on the video, and we're introduced, this man's grandson killed this man's son. It's the first time that the kids have actually seen an alternative to violence. We break that. Our society is very much an eye for an eye. And soon after I started the foundation, I reached out to the grandfather with the attitude, I'm not here screaming resentment and anger and revenge and hatred because your grandson killed my son. No. What I really see here is we both lost a son because Tony lived with his grandfather and calls him daddy. I can't bring my son back from the dead. He's gone forever. There's nothing you can do to get Tony out of prison. And I've started this foundation with a very lofty mission of stopping kids from killing kids. I can't do this alone. The real reason I'm here is to ask for your help. And it behooves us to work together. Because it was your grandson that took the life of my son. While I can't bring Tariq back, and while you can't get Tony out of prison, the one thing you and I can do is to make sure no other young person in our community ends up dead like my son, or ends up in prison like your grandson. That we can do. Will you help me? And he was very quick to take my hand of forgiveness. And the first thing out of his mouth was, "Thank you for reaching out to me." Ever since I found out that my grandson was responsible for the loss of your son, I went into the prayer closet. Place is a Baptist from the South. Praying that someday I get to meet you so I can express my condolences to you and your family. And thank you for reaching out to me. Of course, I will help you. The foundation is now in its 27th year. And Ples and I are as close to each other as brothers. We're still together. We're still very active in the foundation. He's an important person in my life. As I say, we are water bearers for each other. I help him carry his weight. He helps me carry my weight. I would never have met him had his grandson not killed my son. I can genuinely tell you, he's a good man, has a master's degree in urban development. He worked as an enterprise manager for the city of San Diego, had a nice home for his grandkid. Had no clue that his grandkid was involved in a gang. And we met under some very excruciating circumstances. And here we are as brothers. He's African American, although I always kidding about that. I always tell him, Ples, I'm the African American. I was born in Africa. You were not. He's Christian. I'm Muslim. His kid killed my son. We're brothers. With the grace of God, the foundation has grown every year and continues to reach more and more and more of our young people. We specialize from 5th grade to 10th grade. Tony joined a gang in 6th grade and took my son's life in 8th grade. We have now, after being on this journey for over 20 plus years, we've created what we call a safe school model. And that safe school model has 6 different programs. 4 are for youth. The first is a live assembly with the grandfather and me. And you saw a little bit of that on the video. And then we debrief the kids. And I often ask, of course, we do a lot of our work in inner city schools. I often ask the students, how many of you have lost family members as a result of violence. The first time I asked, 2/3 of the hands went up. 2/3. Middle school kids. 12, 13, 14 years old, they're dealing with such grief. I cried all the way home thinking, my God. So there's a lot of, and anger often is unprocessed grief. And we recognize that our kids were suffering, and of course with the pandemic that has doubled. We have tremendous demand right now. We can go to 100 schools. We just don't have the resources to do it. So we debrief. And we got some amazing results. The first time we did a program, it was at Bernie Elementary School, which was Tony's alma mater. And there were 750 kids. They were very confused. I got a call from the counselor saying, our kids are very confused because Tony was the first 14-year-old in the state of California to be tried as an adult. So his face was everywhere on the papers, on TV, and the kids are confused. Is he a hero? Is he a criminal? What's going on here? Would you please come and talk to the kids? So we broke them up into 250 kids. We did 3 different assemblies with them. And in the Q&A, the questions wouldn't stop. This is our first assembly. The next day, the principal called me and says, the kids were so moved with your story, they have written you letters. And I said, oh, great. I really would love to see what the kids have to say. I'll come by the school and pick up the letters. She gave me 375 letters. 750 kids, half of them wrote to us. And each one will bring tears to your eyes. I still have one on my wall that says, the ultimate expression of love is forgiveness. 7th grader. And that gave me hope. That not only are these concepts of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, and peacemaking teachable, our kids are hungry for them. But we recognize that an assembly doesn't change behavior. Yeah, we were able to change attitude. But changing behavior is more complex. I drink too much caffeine, but I read it's better for you now. New science tells us. So then we decided we needed to do more. So then we created a 10-week curriculum. We have 3 levels of it. First level is 5th and 6th graders. Second is 7th and 8th. The third is 9th and 10th. And these are all based on teaching the soft values. These are all based on teaching restorative practices. This is all about teaching kids not to react, but to respond. Teaching that if you're going to be a nonviolence leader, you always make good and nonviolent choices, even when you are violated like I was. Always. If you want to be, we want to inspire these kids to take on leadership roles, but to be committed to teaching these principles of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, and peace building. You can't destroy dark with dark. You can't destroy hate with hate. Only love can do that. This is MLK Jr. But even then, we found out that those 2 programs were not enough. So we created a 3rd one, which is a Peace Club. And that essentially is a leadership program. We have 60 titles of how do you become an effective leader, like most of you in the room are. And how not only do you become effective leaders, also committed to the principles of nonviolence. We found out even that wasn't enough. Now, typically in San Diego County, our middle schools have 1,000 kids. Between 8 and 12% of those kids are on that slippery slope, like Tony was, and likely to be involved with gangs. So we created a mentoring program. Now, the first 3 programs goes to the entire school. The mentoring program is targeted to those 8 to 12%. Our mentors go through 60 hours of training to learn these principles that I spoke about and how do you impart them. And they don't only work with these kids in schools, they work with them in their home and in their community. All of our mentors have an undergrad degree. Many of them are street kids. I'll give you an example of one. We have not only a mentor now, she's a manager and an incredible facilitator. Her name is Rocio. When she was in 7th grade, on her way home from school, she only lived like 4 blocks away from school, there was a gang waiting, and basically the initiation was whoever next crosses our street, you go beat that person up. Of course, it was Rocio, and she was jumped by a group of gangs, and they beat her and pulled her hair. And fortunately, there was an adult there that was able to interfere, and she ran all the way home. A few days later, Ples and I were there. We were introduced. This man's grandson killed this man's son, and here they are in the spirit of brotherhood and forgiveness. And she was so moved that she forgave the gang members that mauled her, went through high school, went to Berkeley, got a degree in social work, and came and started to work for TKF. And when she shares her journey to the kids, it is so powerful. So the mentoring program, and I think there's plenty of science that tells you that mentoring actually does work. I wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Ellen. I don't know if she's still in the room, but let's give her some more love. Because a safe school model has been tested and evaluated by Cal State San Marcos, and they did a great job. And we're very close. We are partnering with them. And we've been also studied by other San Diego State and many other of our good universities here. Because when you put all the 4 programs together under the Safe School model, not only are we able to teach these important values, we're able to cut suspensions and expulsions by 70%. It's pretty huge. Because if you expel or suspend a student, guess where he ends up in? Not in school. Very often they get involved with gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. I wish that number was 100%. We're working hard towards it because I think expulsions and suspensions are barbaric, not a mark of a civil society. When a kid misbehaves as an altercation, there's probably very good reasons for it. I do this work in prisons. I've yet to meet an offender that was not a victim. Tony's no different. He was married. He was born to a 15-year-old. Had a very difficult childhood up in South Central Los Angeles. His grandfather got him when he was 7 or 8 years old. The recidivism rate in our juvenile system is 84%. The cost is $148,000 a year to incarcerate a youth for 1 year, which is over $400 a day. And yet, After spending that kind of money, the recidivism rate is 84%. So essentially, you're spending that forever. We are making sure at least 70% of the kids don't end up like Tony did. The recidivism rate in the LCP, in the adult system, is 2/3. There's a program called LCP, which is Life Connection Program, run by the chaplain. It's a spiritual program. Every inmate has a spiritual teacher. If you're a Christian, you have a minister. If you're a Muslim, you have an imam. If you are Jewish, you have a rabbi. And I normally speak at the front end, share my story about how they can go out and make sure other young people don't follow in their former footsteps. The recidivism rate is, I only got 0 minutes, is that right? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm carried away. I'll wrap it up in a few more minutes. So in other words, 83% actually change their behavior. So I'm very enthused. We've just recently added 2 more programs. One is for parents with University of Berkeley, and one is for teachers, because they are very traumatized, and of course the pandemic is a big part of it. So let me finish with a quote that inspired my Fulfillment to Peace trilogy. And I wrote that. I wrote this with a quote soon after 9/11. And this quote actually is the basis of my book, From Fulfillment to Peace. So I'll finish with that. It goes like this: sustained goodwill creates friendship. That ought to be obvious, because you don't make friends by bombing them. You make friends by extending goodwill. Sustained goodwill creates friendship. Sustained friendship creates trust. Sustained trust creates empathy. Sustained empathy creates compassion. Sustained compassion creates peace. I call my peace formula: goodwill, friendship, trust, empathy, compassion, peace. But people ask me, how do you extend goodwill to the person who murdered your child? I tell them, you do that through forgiveness. As it's evident, it worked for me, it worked for my family. What's the miracle? It worked for Tony and his family. It can work for you and your family. The holidays are upon us. It can work for Israel and Palestine, North and South Korea. It can work for Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria. It can work for the United States of America. So my sisters and brothers, let me leave you with this, that peace is possible. How do I know that? Because I am at peace. Thank you very much, and namaste.